Good morning and welcome to episode 168 of Page One, the Writers Podcast. I'm Tarek.
I'm Marco. How do you know people are listening to this in the morning?
I can just tell.
We're a
I can only imagine
podcast.
The nicest way for most people to wake up in the morning is the sound of our voices in their ears.
Nice, I see. Yeah. So on an alarm or something. This is how you're going to wake them up. Good morning. Thanks for joining us again for another episode of the podcast where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers, find out how they got into the industry and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. And we do have, as I always say, a great back catalogue of guests there, so please do check that out if you haven't already. But if this is your first episode, then you're joining us for a good one.
Yes, what a first episode to start with if this is your first, because we are chatting with the wonderful Graeme Macrae Burnet, who is a Scottish writer who's written a number of excellent books, but perhaps his bloody project is the one you're most familiar with. It came out in 2015 and it was, of course, shortlisted for the Booker Prize. It's about a small crofting murder and the kind of, in the 19th century, I think it is, yeah. And then kind of that kind of fake documents and that kind of metafiction vibe that it's got, which is very cool. And Case Study is his most recent book, which was longlisted for the Booker Prize.
Yeah,
so it's a really interesting chat.
We talked to him about that sort of metafiction in the way that he doesn't write what you might term a straight novel or whatever. Although, as he tells us, in his view, his books are more like the original novels than... Yes,
like Dracula, etc. That kind of... They were always books within books.
Exactly. Yeah. So, it's really interesting hearing about that. And also, just talking about his process, which is, when you're writing something like that, you'd think you would need to carefully plan it all out. But it turns out that is absolutely not the case. But we will get straight into it after a quick advert for our writer's notebook, and then we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and to let you know about next week's guest.
But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with Page One.
Did you always want to be a writer?
Well, first of all, hi, thanks for having me, Marco and Tarek. Did I always want to be a writer? Well, I wanted to be a writer since I was a teenager. I wasn't a huge reader as a child. I mean, my mum would take me to the library every week, in Kilmarnock, where I was brought up. But as a teenager, I don't think I really had I wasn't a big reader. And it was only when I came across a book you might have heard of called Catcher in the Rye And I took it home from school, and suddenly I felt that here was a book that communicated something to me, and it communicated in a voice that I related to, this alienated, slightly unpleasant teenager, which was exactly what I was at the time. So suddenly I felt like, literature is not something elsewhere about other people.
Mm-hmm.
It can be about me too. And I think, lots of writers, whatever their background, find a book that sort of mirrors their experience in some way and draws them into the world of writing. So, I mean, even then I started writing. I don't even mention this very often, but I did write some poetry. And I was just writing stuff. I wrote songs and wrote short stories. And for some reason, yeah, for sure. I at that moment, all I wanted in life was to publish a novel. I wouldn't even say I wanted to be a writer. I don't know if I knew what that was.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I still don't. But yeah, no. So yeah, really, it started when I was a teenager.
And I think you obviously studied English at uni, and then went on to teach English abroad, and then came back and worked as a researcher. Were you writing throughout that time? When did you, I suppose, start seriously trying to write that novel that you wanted to get published?
Well, I did all through all these different experiences. I did, more or less. I was always writing some short stories or something. So I'd probably written, I don't know, 30 short stories. By the time I got to being published, I wasn't even sending them out most of the time. I wrote a novel in the 1990s, a pretty generic crime novel, which. I had a guy was interested in it. I think it was okay, but it didn't get published. And now I'm very happy about that. I wasn't so happy at the time. So yeah, I definitely was always writing. And, I totally regard that process as the process of learning the craft. And I dabbled in different styles, and I was probably very easily influenced by whatever I might be reading at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I was a literature student in Glasgow University in the 80s, I was like, I was basically besotted with Samuel Beckett. So I was writing this kind of Beckettian, pretentious, absolute tosh. And then there was a while I was reading. This was a time when Janice Galloway and James Kelman were publishing some of their earlier work. And of course, tremendously influential because they were writing about the places around me in voices that you hear in the streets of Glasgow. Mm-hmm. So I wrote some sort of Kelman-esque short stories, and later on, maybe when I finished university and I was reading Bukowski, and, reading Bukowski is very liberating if you've been, doing, 18th century Augustan verse at university. So yeah, I tried out loads and loads of styles. As I say, I had written a novel in the 90s, but I was you mentioned I was working in TV as a researcher, and I lost my job, which was fine because I was kind of at the end with it anyway. And I was 40. And I thought, okay, if not now, when? I had a wee bit of money from the job that I'd been doing. I felt like I could fund myself for about a year as a writer. And I ended up writing what became The Disappearance of Adèle Bedeau. Actually took me about 3 years to write it. And I'm sure we'll get on to the publishing journey, but it was about another 3 years before it appeared in print. But so I was 46 when I published my first novel, which mm-hmm. will be heartening to some people and disheartening to others.
Had you ever considered, you obviously went back to uni a few times and you studied different stuff and you kind of retrained, etc., for different jobs as you went, but did you ever think about going back to do like a creative writing course or to do anything like that? And do you think they're of any value to people?
Well, I mean, just on my own personal experience, I mean, I think I'm 55, and so, I mean, creative writing as a taught subject at university is quite a new thing in Britain, aside from a couple of places, and it's certainly relatively recently that it's, basically most universities will offer some kind of creative writing courses. So it wasn't really on my radar. Whether if I'd been a bit younger, it might have occurred to me. I don't know. I mean, I'm a bit of a lone wolf. and I don't seek out advice. And I've never been part of a writers group. I've never gone to a workshop. I've never given a workshop. So for myself, I can understand that I might have got to the point where that would have felt like a useful thing to do, but it just didn't really tally with my chronology. Mm-hmm. Are they useful? I think you have to ask the people who do the courses. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, obviously I know lots of writers, some of whom have gone through creative writing courses and they've had a really positive experience. Others have gone through creative writing courses, not had such a positive experience. But I think it depends a lot on the chemistry between the tutors and the students, and maybe the chemistry within the student group. And then, of course, there are other people who have just gone the traditional route of kind of teaching yourself or finding your own way. So, I mean, I'm probably more on the skeptic side of the whole creative writing thing. I mean, I met a woman. I just finished doing an event, and it was in the signing queue, and a woman came up to me and said, "Oh, my son really wants to be a writer, so he's going off to university to study creative writing." And to me, that's slightly depressing, that it's a sort of, the way to become a writer mm-hmm. is to go and do a degree in creative writing. I think there's a lot more to being a writer than that. But that's not to say these courses don't have a function. And I don't know, I mean, do you guys have experience of doing these things?
No, but I mean, it, like you say, it's everyone has their own experience, and we've had a lot of guests on who have been through some of these courses, and you know, I think largely probably found them useful in some way, but they've definitely taken different things out of them. Yeah. I think it's almost the experience, it's just almost having the sort of time, or sort of almost being forced into the discipline of actually writing that is the most valuable thing about these things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, clearly just to have some deadlines and to motivate you, and maybe to have a supportive cohort, somebody, everybody has to show their work at a certain point to a critical reader. And whether that's within the framework of a creative writing course, or you're lucky enough to have some trusted friends who will give you feedback. But you have to do it in some way. You can't just write your glorious masterpiece in the first draft and then send it to an agent and they go, "Here's the check for £1 million." So everyone has to find their way to go through that sort of becoming critical of their own work.
I suppose for you, in a way, writing 30 short stories or whatever it was that you'd done, that in a way is your own process and going your own sort of training into the world of writing.
No, I mean, as I said, I totally regard that as learning the craft. Mm-hmm. And, I remember certain stories that I wrote, which I was like, oh, right, okay. I mean, maybe looking back, I was doing something I hadn't done before, maybe like, entering the consciousness of a character in a different way, allowing mm-hmm. the reader into those thoughts using different modes of narration. I wasn't necessarily conscious of what I was doing, but I can look back and see things that I learned.
Yeah.
And when I came to write The Disappearance of Adèle Bedeau, of course that's my first published novel, but it actually wasn't my first novel. And, it was, I'm looking back at it, I'm actually surprised at the sort of level of control in that book. And I remain proud of that book. I'm very fond of it for various reasons. But yeah, I think it was the culmination of all these years of, experimenting with different styles and so on.
Yeah.
Well, let's chat about that book then, because obviously, as you say, that was the first book which was out there, that you put out there. That was like after you'd written your first book that didn't go anywhere, but this is your first actual kind of proper book, if you want to put.
Yeah, I'm happy to call it proper. Yeah.
So what was the process there? Did you write it? Did you go for an agent first? Did you go straight to the publisher? What was your route?
Well, I wrote that book never believing that it would be published. I mean, I thought I was writing something to slay my own demons. I needed to write a novel. I didn't know what to write. I'd started various other novels, maybe written them to like 20, 30,000 words, and then find myself in up against a wall. So the way this particular one came about, just in case readers don't know anything about it, it's a sort of detective story set in a small town in France called Saint Louis, which is a real place. And I happened to visit this town, which is a very unremarkable place, as is stated in the book. And I went for lunch in this particular restaurant, traditional French brasserie, and I was totally captivated by the ambience of this place, particularly because I'm very influenced by the Belgian writer Georges Simenon, and he describes these kind of provincial French settings, really immaculately with great economy of language. So I felt like I was in a Simenon novel. And at the time, this was about the year 2001, I guess. I wrote 2 or 3 pages just as a description of this restaurant and the characters that I saw in it. And it was only 10 years later that I came back to those pages. It always stuck in my mind. And I kind of played a trick on myself, which was to tell myself that I wasn't writing a novel. I was just writing a story that was getting really long. And because I still think writing a novel is, it's a very intimidating prospect. It's a mountain. You have to keep going. It takes ages. At least it takes me ages. And so I just allowed it to grow fairly organically, and I didn't have a plan. I had the characters and the initial situation, which is this outsider character called Manfred Baumann, who goes regularly to the restaurant, and then the waitress Adèle Bedeau disappears, and he's suspected of being involved in her disappearance. So I kind of had that initial situation, but I didn't know anything that was going to happen, and so I just kept writing. I certainly, I had no thought of approaching agents or publishers until it was finished. Do you want me to go on and talk about that now?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, please.
So yeah, I mean, as I say, it took me quite a long time. I had a draft which was quite short, about 55 or 60,000 words. And yeah, as a situation that you're in, Marco, and I'm sure many of the listeners are in, I started sending it out. I sent it out in a little batches of like 5 at first to different agents, and I kind of took a different tack with some of my approaches. I started with the agents in Scotland who I felt might be more conducive to a Scottish-based writer. Gradually I spread my net a little bit further. As we were saying before we came on air, it's very frustrating. You don't get any response, or you get a response, 6 months later. And if you even get an email back, you're like, oh my God, an agent secretary just sent me an email. I can't believe it. This is amazing. Because you're in the situation of such desperation, because the agents are the gatekeepers to the publishers, or at least the bigger publishers. Eventually, an agent asked to see the manuscript. I'll pick up the story, sent off the full manuscript, and then the agent. So this was a young agent within a larger agency. So it was still a small agency, but he was basically a guy building his list, I guess. Mm-hmm. So I went down to London, had a meeting, which was absolutely 100% 1 hour talking about the manuscript. No chit chat, just boom, boom, boom. Here's what I think. In the end, the upshot was, can you make it 20,000 words longer? I had actually already written some material for what I intended to be the follow-up to the book. So I incorporated some of that material. I developed a couple of the characters. I balanced the novel much, much better between the 2 central characters, Manfred Baumann and George Gorski, the cop. Sent it back. They were happy. And then, okay, right. And so, this is all good. So I now have an agent. At that point, we signed a contract. And, I have only praise for this agent and agency, because they put a lot of time into the editorial side, reading my drafts and giving really good feedback. And I think you'd be very foolish if you didn't listen to that feedback when you're at that stage. So then they sent it out to the publishers, and nobody wanted it. Of course, you think once you've got an agent, you've reached the Holy Grail.
That's right.
Will fall.
I think it's
So that, in my case, didn't happen. I think the book is a kind of curiosity in a way, and that it is a crime novel, but it's not. it's very long on ambience and character. It's very short on narrative. So it's not a traditional crime novel. It's much more in a European tradition and much more character based. So it wasn't really crimey enough for straight crime publishers, but it didn't seem like a literary novel either. So it didn't really fit into the boxes. And also people were like, why is this Scottish guy writing a novel set in France? If we want a French novel, we'll get one written by a French guy. So for whatever reason, it didn't get published. I then took it on myself and sent. There was a small number of indie publishers at that point were accepting submissions, unsolicited manuscripts. It so happened that Saraban Books were starting a crime imprint called Contraband, in which they were intending to publish, more unusual sort of crime writing. So at this point, the stars were aligned. Here's a small at that time, Glasgow-based publisher starting a crime imprint, wanting kind of weird, quirky crime. And so I sent it to them, and they accepted it pretty quickly, within a few weeks, I would say, maybe 3 months. And then all joy unbridled. I mean, at that point, I remember saying to my girlfriend, I will die a happy man because my novel has been published. That is all I ever wanted to do, going back to the beginning of the conversation. I had no thoughts about selling lots of books. I just wanted my book to be published. And, thanks to Sarah Hunt at Saraban Books, it still moves me to remember those amazing times, So it was quite a long road, The editing process with them was pretty light, but still another year probably before it came out, or 9 months anyway.
And in that sort of period where you got the agent sends it out, and before Saraban pick it up, and there isn't a lot of interest. I mean, at that point, what were you thinking at that point? Were you thinking, oh, I'm going to have to start again, I'm going to back to square one, or were you still hopeful that you would find a home for it somewhere?
I think at that point I was not hopeful that I would find a home for it, and I it had crossed my mind to self-publish, although that was never have been my ideal route, and not something that I would necessarily, I think it's something to be entered into with due consideration, put it that way, especially for a novel. But no, I had an idea for another book, which was His Bloody Project. So, I mean, I also, around almost exactly at this time, I won the New Writers Award from the Scottish Book Trust. So I actually, within a week, the same week, I won the New Writers Award and got an agent. So I was kind of sitting pretty at that point. So because I was doing the New Writers scheme and going through that, which was fantastic for me, I met, a whole bunch of writers in the similar situation that I was in, going through the same stuff. And I was writing His Bloody Project. So that was kind of the next thing. And I certainly remember feeling that if His Bloody Project didn't find a publisher, then that would be it. I'd give up. But whether I would have, I don't know. But so at the end of there was definite times of, there was sort of despair, but I think I had a very Scottish attitude, which was I only ever sent anything out in order to know that it would be rejected. I had to go through it, so that I wouldn't be left wondering, I should have done this. I honestly, I just didn't think that anybody would ever publish my work. I mean, obviously that's a bit, I don't know, maybe it was a sort of feelings of I'm not worthy or insecurity at the time. I'm not sure, or maybe it's because I hadn't been in contact with people who were published and were kind of role models.
I think until you either are in touch with people like that and speak to them, or until you have been picked up, it can seem like an impossible thing to do. The steps are, sort of they look simple. You send in the chapters, they get picked up, etc., but it can seem like an impossible goal when there's so many people try to do it. So
that's right. And once you're inside it, as I am now, I'm like, of course agents want to see your work. But I think it's also like, I mean, I come from a quite middle class kind of background, but I come from Kilmarnock, and but I wasn't brought up hanging around with other writers, or seeing writers. It wasn't like a sort of career path that I thought was open to me, or even anything in the creative industries, was, if so. I think I suppose I thought it was the sort of thing that was for other people, not really for the likes of me. And I say that not trying to play any sort of poor me sort of card. I say I don't come out from a deprived background, but I don't come from a background of sort of media type people. I didn't know people in that kind of lines of work. But yeah, the thing is, all you can do is exhaust all avenues, and just if there's one publisher that's left that might look at your work, send it to them, or one agent. It only takes one person.
That's exactly it. I mean, one of our other guests said, once you've just got to keep asking until someone says yes, essentially.
Yeah, I knew from when I worked in TV. Basically, I wrote proposals for TV programs and pitched them to broadcasters. And you could pitch a program idea, and they'd be like, "Nah, not for us." And then the commissioner would change, and then suddenly they'd want something on, 18th century, haikus, and you just sent a proposal about 18th century haikus. But now somebody else was making it, so the stars were not aligned. And as I say, although I'd like to think that Saraband liked the book, they weren't concerned that it wasn't about what box it fitted in.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to think they would have picked it up anyway, but as I say, the stars were aligned in that they were just setting up this imprint, so it worked. The timing was good.
And I mean, looking at your books as a whole, they're all, they all play with the idea of kind of reality and metafiction, and it's kind of whether it's a rediscovered French novel or it's a collection of manuscripts that you've pulled. It's an interesting concept that you do with your books, and I kind of wondered, what was it that drew you to this style of writing? Why did you not want to just write a conventional novel? What was it about this style that you really liked?
Well, I would actually argue that these are conventional novels because, if you look at novels from the beginnings of time, the beginnings of the form of the novel, I admit it's unusual to say that you're only the translator of your first novel, as I did, and it was written by somebody else. But Don Quixote, the first novel, is allegedly a found document translated from Arabic. Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, also a found document novel written by Robinson Crusoe, who was purported at that time to be a real person. If you look at the construction of Dracula or Frankenstein, all these big 19th century novels, they're almost always constructed through various documents, pieces of diary, letters, journals, and so on. So I would say that I'm drawn to it. Yeah, absolutely. But this is the conventional novel. But I think maybe in the sort of latter part of the 20th century and now, we've maybe forgotten about some of these techniques that are available to us as novelists. I mean, the whole metafiction stuff, which is in all my books, there was never a grand plan. I mean, it was just like, so with Adèle Bedeau, I felt like I was writing a translation anyway, because the characters were French. They would have been speaking in French. And the book draws very heavily on that tradition of mid-20th century French crime fiction, or French fiction in general. And I wanted to give it the feeling of being a translation. To me, it just seemed completely natural to invent an actual French author who'd actually written the book. So there was that with that book, and then with His Bloody Project, the concept of that book was this is a novel which was going to be told in a series of documents. So that was very much the heart of the idea of the book, which came actually from a book of a case study of French criminal case, the case of Pierre Riviere. And there is a volume which contains witness statements, newspaper reports, and his own memoir. So I kind of modelled His Bloody Project on that French non-fiction book. I think it's kind of become my signature in a way, and I get asked about it a lot. And I enjoy all these the playfulness, or I feel I'm just like interrogating the text. You know, if an author presents first person text, I'm like, yeah, where did you get it? Where did you find this journal? It's just a question that I would ask myself as a reader. So I'm just coming up with the answers. You know, where I found this document in the archive in the Highlands, or Mr. Gray sent me this series of notebooks from Clacton-on-Sea belonging to his cousin. I suppose I enjoy that stuff.
And I suppose they also, I kind of feel books like this ask more of the reader than other books would. And, you know, because you almost as a reader, you get engaged with it. You kind of, it becomes more, it breaks the fourth wall a little bit, and you have to decide yourself what you take from the book.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more, Tarek. And I mean, that is part of the appeal. That I really feel that in presenting the narrative in these kind of ways with maybe different versions of the same incident, you're asking the reader to make up his or her mind about what's going on. You're not, you can't be a passive reader. And as a writer, I never ever want to tell the reader what to think. You know, I want the potential meanings or interpretations to be very open for the reader, and I don't want to close them down by some sort of resolution at the end. And I think by presenting documents, you already throw into doubt the veracity of what you might be reading. You know, is this person being truthful? Should I believe what they're saying? What have they left out of their narrative? Why have they left that out? You know, so as you say, yeah, absolutely. I think it invites the reader in, and I think, I mean, with His Bloody Project, obviously it got a big leg up by a certain book prize, but even with that leg up from the Booker Prize, wouldn't account for the success of the book. And I think which is an absolute surprise and mystery for me, because I think it's not it doesn't have bestseller written all over it. But I think it was a big success in book clubs precisely for the reason you mentioned, Tarek, because people were able to have a conversation about the book. You know, the book is open for discussion, and you can have opposing views, and you can actually talk about the book and have an argument about it. And I think that word of mouth kind of fueled the success of that book.
And when you're writing these stories, when you're pulling these types of stories together, how detailed do you plan them out beforehand? Do you have an idea, or do you just start writing and see what
I don't plan anything. I don't plan
okay.
I don't have a planning brain. But even if I could, I don't want to, because I mean, with His Bloody Project, I knew that I was going to have a central character, Scottish crofter, and he's going to commit a murder. That was my starting point. I didn't know who he was going to murder, and of course, but I knew that I was working towards that point. As I say, with the situation in Adèle Bedeau, I started from a situation of a couple of characters, a setting, and the disappearance of the waitress, and everything follows from that. You know, so sometimes I have an idea of some scenes that will come up. But for me, it's becoming more and more important to me that if I feel that I'm writing just to reach a certain goal or a certain narrative goal in the story, then I'm going to kind of go there in a direct line.
Yeah.
And then if any time when I go to the Mitchell Library nearby here and I sit down to do my writing, anytime I feel something magic's happened, it's not because I'm trying to get to a point. It's because I've gone off somewhere. I had absolutely no idea where that would have occurred. And it only occurred because I sat down to write. I mean, even yesterday. So I'm back in San Luis. I'm writing the final book with George Gorski. Gorski's going for lunch in the Restaurant de la Cloche as usual, but it's Thursday, so he has to walk through the market. Now, he doesn't even have to walk through the market. I could just have him going straight into the restaurant. I had a kind of inkling that I wanted to write a scene about the market, partly because it's a scene that occurs in lots of French literature, like in Madame Bovary and in Émile Zola. this is an exclusive. Don't tell anyone that my motivation is so brilliantly pretentious here. Um, so I'm just writing. I'm writing Gorski going through the market, and it's like, of course, he's going to meet people he knows because he walks through the market every day. And then within a couple of hours, I'd written 1,200 words, which is quite a lot for me. And this market has taken on a whole life, and there are these characters. I invented the character of the guy who goes around getting the fees from each of the stall holders, and this guy's completely corrupt. But when Gorski became chief of police, the corrupt bursar offered him a brown envelope, which Gorski refused. And Gorski's refusal to take this envelope, he thought this could make him a kind of hero of the stall holders, but it had the opposite effect because they're all complicit in this corruption. And so he set himself outside it. And I'm like, I enjoyed writing this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if none of that existed before I went to the library yesterday. And it existed because I went there with no plan. I thought, right, I'm going to try and write 1,000 words as I usually do. Let's write that bit about the market. This has no narrative importance whatsoever in the book, but it will be in the book.
Yeah.
And it's really important for me, especially in those books, the books are about that stuff. If there's a crime in the books, it's incidental. It's just an excuse for me to explore Gorski walking through the market.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't plan.
I mean, it sounds to me, though, that although you say that you don't plan, you must do a lot of research so that when you come to sit down, for instance, what this market is like, or how it would be set out, or what the crofts were like back in that time, etc. So I think you do a lot of research before you even sit down to start writing.
Well, no, that's also true. I would draw a distinction between research and planning. I mean, I actually love research, and then His Bloody Project and Case Study were, especially His Bloody Project. It was a very research-heavy book, lots of different aspects. And I enjoyed doing the research. And yes, you're absolutely right. I had to, in order to start writing about the village in the Highlands, I had to go and learn about that and read the available texts and visit some Highland museums where you can kind of walk around and look at the kind of buildings and the tools and all that. I'm getting my head into the sort of environment of the book. Similarly with Case Study, I read lots of women's magazines from the 60s to try and get myself into the mind of my female character. Funnily enough, I mean, I spent a week in San Luis in January, and there is a market there. It's in the same square, and would I have written that scene in the market? Well, I went to the market because I knew I wanted to write a scene in the market. So it's a kind of symbiosis of I've got an idea of writing something where the market is the hub of a town, a small town, so it's an interesting location for me. But of course, then I go to the market and I walk around and I pay attention to what I'm seeing. But the market I've written about is entirely fictional. I mean, but yeah, so yeah, that's an interesting question about the relationships. I suppose when I say I don't plan, what I mean is I don't plan the narrative. I like to allow. So, for example, yesterday when I wrote this bursar who was called, what did I call him? I called him Schloop, but he will not be called Schloop. I just used that name because I didn't want to waste time trying to think of the right name. Yeah. But I will anyway. But maybe Schloop, because I've written him now, Schloop will appear somewhere else in the book. He might just be sitting at the end of the bar having a cognac, and he might turn away when Gorski comes in. But that's just a tiny, not even story, but it's creating the mesh of connections between the characters.
Yeah, it makes the world come alive, I think.
Yeah, and it's writing about a small town. It's very important to me that these characters recur and you see them. Because that's the kind of claustrophobia that I'm trying to go for.
And you mentioned there that you go to the library, I think Mitchell Library in Glasgow, to write, and you've said before that words don't come easily when you're writing. You said that you try and write 1,000 words a day, but I mean, is that a strict target for you? Do you stay there until you've written 1,000 words, or is it just an ambition?
It's an ambition. It's an ambition, and I think the thing is, it's not that hard to write 1,000 words. I mean, and you can write 1,000 words in 2 hours, but it takes me at least 6 hours to write those two. To spend those 2 hours writing. And Monday I went to the library. I didn't write a word. I looked at a couple of hundred words I'd written last week, and I sometimes read a bit in the library to kind of get myself in the mood. But I mean, the reason I go to the library is because, as you say, words, it doesn't come easily to me, and I need to try to eliminate distractions as much as possible. I use an internet blocker on my laptop. If possible, I don't take my phone to the library. So it's just a way of, that's just kind of discipline. And I like to go there like I'm going to work now. So yeah, if I write 1,000 words, sometimes I will just stop. I mean, not exactly 1,000 words, but I might stop it. I mean, I won't necessarily finish a scene, because if I haven't finished the scene, it makes it easier for me to go back and pick up. And that can be quite useful. But sometimes if, maybe I've written like 600 words late, I'll be like, oh, come on, keep going, Yeah. So it's a bit superficial to say 1,000 words. It's a completely random number. But, I mean, I know I say I don't like giving out advice, but, whatever it takes to motivate you, whether it's a word count or you like to write by hand and write a certain number of pages, whatever it takes, just to find your own ways of motivating yourself, And I will always leave the library happy if I've written 1,000 words, even if I know those words are really terrible and I will never even open the document again. That's fine for me. You only know that those words are no good once you've written them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And I think part of the difficulty with writing is, people that don't write think it's, you just go and sit down and you bang out the words. What's so difficult about it? But it can be a struggle, and sometimes it can sort of build up, and you sort of think, right, well, I'll sort that. I'll do it tomorrow. And if you put things off, then you never progress. So at least getting the bad words out, I suppose, is still moving forward in some way.
Yeah.
I know. Absolutely. I mean, there's nothing happens if you don't write any words. Simple as that. I mean, there may be some people. Every writer works in a different way, and some people like to walk along the beach thinking about the problems of the narrative and thinking about it in the abstract. And I would love to be able to do that. It doesn't work for me. I'm only really thinking about what I'm doing when I'm doing it, or if I'm in quite an immersive period of writing. Of course, I sometimes scribble notes to myself on random bits of paper, and of little ideas that's come to me. But yeah, I mean, I would definitely be an advocate of keep going. You can't sit around waiting for inspiration. At least if you're writing a novel, I mean, because it's a war of attrition.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I also wanted to touch on the Booker Prize nominations, which you've had for 2 of your books, His Project and Case Study, and the first time you were shortlisted, what was that like, and what kind of impact did that have on you in terms of your career? What doors did it open?
So yeah, the impact of the longlisting for His Bloody Project in the first place was absolutely massive, because what I didn't realise is that the reach of the Booker Prize is so huge. It's completely international. So as soon as you're on the long list, and as in the situation I was in as being a very unknown writer, book had sold 500 copies or something, foreign publishers look at the long list, and maybe if you're J.M. Coetzee or Ian McEwan or Hilary Mantel, you already have foreign deals everywhere. But suddenly foreign publishers are interested in your work, and that is incredibly exciting. So immediately on the long list, a very brilliant Australian publisher called Text came in, and there was an auction in Italy. Book got picked up in France, and so on, and that's tremendously exciting. Then you get on the, you think it can't get any better, and then you get on the shortlist, and the shortlist is, it's very intense being on the shortlist of the Booker Prize. I just totally embraced it. I'm like, I'm going to do everything because this opportunity will never come again. Even if somehow I got on the Booker shortlist on another occasion, it would never have the same impact because at that point where I was in my career.
Yeah.
So I did every interview. I wrote all the blog pieces going, and I did all the events I could. And absolutely incredible. And the impact on my career was incalculable. I mean, it was completely life-changing. The weird thing is, His Bloody Project was on the shortlist. It sold about 30,000 copies. The normal number of books that a book sells on the Booker shortlist is about 5,000. And people think that, you sell tens of thousands of books or more. The shortlist, most books sell 5,000 copies.
Wow.
Somehow, His Bloody Project outsold all the other books on the shortlist in total. And then even when I didn't win, it kept selling. I think it sold 10,000 copies in the following January.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, it was totally, and that's why I'm going back to that sort of word of mouth thing. Because although absolutely the Booker Prize provided that book with a platform and brought it into view, and suddenly it's on the front table of every Waterstones in the country with the Booker shortlist. But it absolutely needed that platform. But somehow the effect on that book was incredible. I mean, it's published in 20 countries, and every time your book gets published somewhere else, you get paid. I mean, and it might be 500 euros or it might be 5,000 euros, but you're not doing any more work. Your book is doing that work for you.
Yeah.
And, the impact of that has been incredible. I mean, I spent the following year traveling. I didn't even win, and it would be terrifying to win. So, yeah, it was amazing, life-changing, brilliant. And I made enough money in that process that that I'm not somebody even now every time I make any money from writing I think that's the last money I'll ever make. So I'm very careful with my money. The money I've made is for me allowing me to sustain my career as a writer for as long as possible. So I'm not out buying sort of fancy cars, fancy clothes or anything. So yeah, it made it possible for me to be a full-time writer. I mean, similarly, although I didn't make the shortlist with Case Study, and I'm not going to pretend I'm not disappointed about that, but I wasn't in the same position. I was a little bit more prominent as a writer, so it wasn't going to have the same effect. But even so, it brought in some foreign deals that wouldn't have come along otherwise. Brought me some invitations. I got invited to, some festivals in Canada and stuff. So, and that helps the publisher in America. So yeah, it's you won this. Did you won the Bloody Scotland Prize, Carrie?
Yeah, that's right.
Did that? I mean, how much impact did that have for you?
I mean, in terms of sales, I got a small bump, but nothing major. But in terms of exposure to like invitation to festivals and things like that was the biggest thing, which I found was just, I guess people kind of knew who I was a little bit more than before, I guess.
Absolutely, and it's something people can say when they're introducing you, winner of.
Yeah, exactly.
Did it have an impact on you, in terms of your confidence or things like that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a part which I think it's a kind of independent verification or something that other people, that you've written something that people like is definitely, and that does help the confidence. 'Cause I think we said earlier, so much of it is you in your own head, just easy to kind of get lost in it all. And that's what I actually wanted to ask you about what you wrote afterwards, because when you won the prize, did that have an impact on you and the pressure to provide for your next book? You know, did you think I have to write something as good as, or has to be as big as my last book?
You mean after His Bloody Project?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, again, this goes back to the great relationship I have with Saraband, and I think during the whole circus of the Booker Prize with His Bloody Project, I think there was a point where I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to write something else. I'd actually just finished the first draft of what was the accident on the A35, my sort of secret book that only real fans have read that one.
I've actually got it on a shelf somewhere else. It's an excellent book.
Thanks. So I'd already kind of had a finished draft of that. But my publisher, Sarah Hunt, you know, we were talking about it. She said, Graeme, you know, if you don't want to write anything, don't write anything. And I will never forget that, because I'm her biggest writer. It's the biggest moment for her as a publisher as well. For any publisher, again, on book shortlist, and agents, you know, it's a career highlight. And here she is saying to me, because she cares about me as a person, she at no point said, it'd be really good if you could write another 19th century crime novel. She never ever said that. And then at the point of our great success, she said, you know, if you don't want to write anything, don't write anything. And that she really took the heat off me. And I think because I was already well progressed with the accident on the A35, it made it easier for me to then go on and, you know, publish that. And the thing is, you know, these French books, to me, they're no lesser than my better known books, but they're definitely, they're more modest in tone. They're less noisy. They're less obviously clever, but they're more difficult to write. I struggle more. You know, The Accident in A35 is the most difficult book I've ever written, partly because of this process where I don't plan anything. So I only have the characters and the town. And whereas with His Bloody Project and Case Study, they both had a kind of grandiose structure and a kind of big idea, big central idea. And that in the writing process and the confidence you have to maintain to keep going with an idea, that helps to sustain me. If you're writing a book about nothing, and to use a sort of Seinfeldian phrase, it's really hard. You're like, why am I writing this book? Nobody's going, well, who cares about the market, Sam Louis? Who cares? Yeah, I have those thoughts all the time, you know. But again, I've got, you know, my relationship with Sarah Hunt at Saraband. She is, you know, we joke about it now, talking me off the ledge, where I'm like, okay, like Sarah, this is such a pile of shit. I'm putting it in the bin. She's like, well, why don't you let me have a look at it first? Yeah, I think these kind of relations. Now I do have going back to the agent conversation. I separated amicably with the first agency. As I say, they did a good job for me. Didn't work out. I was in a very unusual position in that I was a Booker shortlisted author without an agent.
All right.
So I, at that point, had agents approaching me. I know this is going to make you feel really jealous, Marco. And saying, oh, I hear you don't have an agent. Would you like to have coffee? So I was there in a very fortunate position whereby I was able to have coffee with a few agents. And I met the person who became my agent, Isabel Dixon of Blake Friedman. She came to one of my events and introduced herself. And, you know, we met up a couple of times, and, you know, it's building those relationships which become very important. And, you know, I had my long-standing relationship with Saraband, and then I had this new relationship with my agent. And it takes a while to just find out how everything's going to work out between you. I mean, I'm now like super, super happy with my relationship with Isabel as well, and I think she's doing a brilliant job for me. But I was very fortunate position. One of the silliest pieces of advice I hear being given to writers is, you know, get the agent that's right for you. I mean, I don't know anybody who got, who didn't just get the only agent who wanted them. You're not generally in a position of being able to choose.
Crossing them off the list. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's the last woman standing,
But I mean, what you're saying there is something that is sometimes missed, because, writing is obviously a very solitary profession a lot of the time, but it is important. I think it's clear from speaking to all the guests we've spoken to on the podcast that to have a supportive team around you in terms of agent and editor, those relationships can be extremely important for a writer.
Absolutely. I mean, I think important in terms of the actual making of the work, but also I think more for me, because I don't show my work until quite a late stage. I've got one sort of trusted reader, but I'm not showing people my first drafts, But it's just that I think it's more the sort of psychological support network as well. Somebody you can phone up and say, this novel's a piece of shit, and they say, oh, don't worry, just keep going, or no, don't worry. I've never had a contract for a future book. I've never had a 2-book deal or anything. So I'm kind of I'm not under pressure like that. Although sometimes I wish I was. I wish Sarah would be like, I'd really like to have this book by October. Like, okay, no problem.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's having people around you to just be on your side is very, very useful. And I do feel very lucky with the people I work with.
Yeah, totally. And so it sounds like at the moment you're just working on the next Gorski book and
the final one.
The final one. I mean, how far along in that process are you?
It's a big old mess. I reckon I've got about 2/3 of a draft. Yeah, maybe a little bit more. I haven't. It's all in separate documents, so some of it written in notebooks. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I must have written 50,000 words. It doesn't have to be a hugely long book, but it is the end of the trilogy. So I want it to be a trilogy by which I want it to mesh in with the other books. It's not just a case of giving another case to my detective. So who knows what anybody will make of this book? I think it's on the one hand it's got no story, but on the other hand it's got like 3 separate stories. So I don't know.
That's the tagline for the book right now.
It's the completion of a project for me. In a way, I think of these 3 books as a single project, and I'll be happy when it's done. As you'll know what it's like. Are you working on a novel, Marco?
I've sort of started playing about with a new idea, but I'm not really hugely far into it at this stage.
I love these kind of answers. I've started playing about. It's so Scottish. When I do events, I sometimes ask the audience, if there anybody in the room is writing, and you can tell all the people who are because you just suddenly look at their feet.
Yeah, exactly.
If we were Americans, they'd all be like, "Hell yeah, I'm a writer."
That's right, exactly.
I'm like, "What have you written?" Nothing.
So what's next after you finish this book? Have you got anything you got your mind on in the horizon?
Well, after I finish the final Gorski book, I've got a big project in mind, which is in my mind a sort of magnum opus, big project, which will take me 5 years to write. I don't want to say too much about it because even nobody knows really much about it. But it'll be a big book with a big, a lot of research, which I love, as I said, and as I say, I'll need to save up a few pennies to sustain me to the point of finishing that one. But it's like I never learn. Every time I've come to a new project, I'm like, oh, it'll be easy next time.
Yeah.
And It never is. And I always, when I was struggling away writing Adèle Bedeau, and not having an agent, not having a publisher, I always thought, if only I had a publisher, it would all be so easy then. But it's somehow, of course, I think it's easier knowing that your work will be published, or at least I would never want a publisher to publish my work if they thought it was substandard. I'd want them to tell me.
And you always set that bar higher for yourself with each book, don't you, I suppose?
Absolutely. And I think I've become more careful with my writing, and I hope I'm getting better. But yeah, I mean, it hasn't really got the actual process of sitting down in front of the laptop hasn't really changed for me.
What was the last book that you read?
The last book, I was away at a Georges Simenon event in Belgium last week, and I've been rereading Payos of Simenon. So I actually this morning finished the Georges Simenon novel called New Haven Dieppe, or L'Homme de Londres in French. Not one of his greatest novels, but the best. I've been reading a lot of Annie Ernaux. So I mean, if anybody's looking for a recommendation, go and read anything by Annie Ernaux, the French writer. She won the Nobel Prize last year, rightfully so. She's so far above any other writer I'm reading at the moment. I will devour anything by Annie.
Excellent.
Nice. What about the last film that you watched?
It may have been Anchorman 2.
What a jump
classic.
from French literature to.
It wasn't actually. I went to see After Sun at the cinema.
Oh yeah, okay.
Which ended up very, very low key film, very small scale. I like that. I really like the atmosphere of it. I've been trying to get back to going to the cinema more regularly. There are certain films in which I would include After Sun that you need to see in the cinema, not necessarily because they're big in scale, but because you kind of commit more to it. And here's a film that you need to. It's taking its time, So yeah, good. I'd recommend that as well.
Nice,
excellent. And
would you recommend Anchorman too?
I was a little bit disappointed, to be honest.
Compared to the classic.
Not as good as the first.
If I had to recommend a Will Ferrell film, it would be Blades of Glory.
Oh yeah,
that's a good one. Yeah,
Blades of Glory.
That's a great one.
I only have to think about Blades of Glory to start laughing. The scene with the toilet paper. Oh my god.
The very slow chase.
Yeah,
on the ice skates.
That's right. Oh my god! I love the way we segued from Nobel Prize
exactly.
to Blades of Glory. That sums up my cultural life.
And what about TV that you're watching or have been watching?
I don't. My TV doesn't really work and hasn't for years. I don't really watch. It's not. I don't watch much TV except for Match of the Day and MasterChef. So yeah, I'm a bit old school when it comes to sort of long form Netflix kind of stuff. Yeah. I'm a bit I'm still stuck in the feature film mode of the 20th century.
And the very last thing we do is a super quick fire either or, and I always say there's no right answer here apart from one, although I suspect I can guess what your answer would be to that one. But we'll start off with French literature or Scottish literature.
French.
Right, that's fine.
TV or cinema? I think we know the answer.
Cinema. Cinema for me.
Night owl or early bird?
Night owl.
Music or no music when you're writing?
No music.
And the last one, audiobook or ebook?
Physical book.
That's exactly the answer Tarek didn't want.
Yeah, I knew they were going to say that. Yeah, we always ask this final question, and nobody ever picks ebook, and I feel like I have to fight the ebook fight single-handedly.
Well, good for you, and there's nothing wrong with ebooks or audiobooks. I've just never read one.
Never, not one.
No, an ebook, no.
Oh wow.
I mean, I don't understand why I would.
If you're on holiday, you can
if you're traveling with 20 books.
Oh, I don't. If I take 5 books on holiday, there's no way I'll even read 3 of them.
Yeah, it's true.
And unless you're going, even if you did read your whole 5 books, which has never happened, you can buy a new one when you're there.
it's true. These are good points.
We'll have to cut this whole end bit off the episode. This is dreadful.
Sorry, are you an aficionado of the e-book?
I mean, I do. I seem to as a caricature that I play a little bit.
I don't know.
I do like ebooks, but I feel so sorry for them now because no one ever picks them. I feel I have to.
Well, authors get really good royalties from ebooks.
That's true. Yeah.
So I mean, I'm not anti ebooks. It's not.
Although they do also sell them for like £1, so it's not.
But it's quite complicated because it's slightly on the basis of the recommended price. That's another argument. But I spend too much time in front of screens already, so that's why I don't read ebooks.
No, fair enough.
Also, as you can see behind me, I am a lover of physical books, and I like to keep the book as a sort of memento, and you can scroll stuff in the margin and.
Yeah. But you write stuff in the. Oh, that's.
It depends on the book. I mean, if it's an old vintage Penguin, no. But if it's a modern paperback, yes.
As long as you don't fold down the corners of the page.
Oh God, no! God, no! You think I'm a barbarian?
I have to say it's a welcome surprise to find a man of such literary talents, and his favourite film is actually Blades of Glory.
Well, yeah, his favourite Will Ferrell film, to be fair.
I think it was his favourite film, he said, of all time.
Yes, no, we are both partial to a Will Ferrell movie, so yeah, always happy to chat about that. I
believe actually he's perhaps the sole reason you're very excited for the Barbie movie, Marco.
Yeah, I think that's true. I didn't really have any desire to see the Barbie movie until I saw Will Ferrell was in it, I'll be honest. But now I'm more keen. No, thanks very much to Graeme for coming on. That was a really interesting chat, and interesting as well to hear about the difficulties sometimes that he has in getting the words on the page and things like that. Because when you read books of that caliber, you can sometimes think this person knows what they're doing. They've got it down, no problem, and yet all writers have that same struggle sometimes, and also his struggle to get these books published, despite them being, in retrospect, they're now obviously held up as great books, but it was very, very difficult for him to find a publisher that was willing to take a chance on them. I don't know if that was to do with the form that they were in and that sort of metafiction.
Yeah,
form,
I know. I wonder. I guess it's kind of. I mean, as you say, even though it was maybe the original type of novel, I suppose it's anything different. Mm-hmm. They find scary, don't the publishers, and they don't, until it's a massive success, and then, as we've said before, they want much more of the same thing.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's a hard beast.
Yeah. So it sounds like we will get the end of the Gorski trilogy at some point, but he's working on that just now. So yeah, thanks very much to Graeme for coming on, and obviously you can buy his books. We'll put a link in the podcast description if you want to do that online. And next week we are moving into the world of film.
Yes, we are chatting with Fleur Daffith, who is, I hope I've pronounced that name correctly. She's a Welsh writer who's written a number of books written in the Welsh language, and she's worked in film, TV again. Yeah. She's had a really interesting career, and it's interesting to chat to someone who has been kind of immersed in that Welsh language and Welsh TV and books, and how that compares with finding success across the rest of the UK. Does that translate well? Do people know about people who are successful in pockets of the UK?
Yeah, because she also writes in English as well. So yeah, but we do chat to her a bit about that, the sort of transition between the two, coming from Wales into the rest of the UK. And she's someone that's won awards. She's won Welsh BAFTA awards and things like that, but it doesn't seem to be worth very much in the eyes of
it's
producers in England, which is, surprising and disappointing.
Frustrating.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But it's a great chat, so please do tune in for that one. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do take the time to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your favourite podcast app, as that helps us to continue to get great guests.
And of course, if you want to get in touch, you could do so via a variety of methods. The first is email, good old-fashioned email, which is podcast@rightgear.co.uk. Or if you want to find us across social media, then all you have to do is search at UK Page 1, and you'll get us on our Twitter page, on our Blue Sky, on our Instagram,
Threads,
on our Threads. But for Mastodon, you need to go to writing.exchange/@page1pod.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, please do get in touch if you want to let us know about the episodes, and we'll be back next week with another great episode.
See you later.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well, so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UK Page 1, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.